one preliminary matter, which is the issue of the release of the transcript. I've heard complaints from my Republican colleagues about the White House only releasing the transcript from the Biden interview this morning. But I have to note that there are, I think, over 90 transcripts that are being held by the majority here in the Judiciary Committee and Oversight Committee for interviews that we all care about. They all go directly to issues with respect to the alleged impeachment inquiry. You know, it's kind of the pot calling the kettle black, it seems to me, as an understatement. So I noted too that when the ranking member requested the majority release the transcripts, the chairman objected. So I hope that we can move forward in the mode of cooperation and sharing information. I think it's just reasonable to do. Mr. Hur, I wanted to thank you again for the work you did. I don't agree with everything you wrote in the report, but that's the nature of the business, I think. But I did want to ask you about this. I know you started off with, in the first line executive summary, we conclude that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter. And I take it that's still your position today.
Yes, it is.
All right. You also noted a little bit below that, for the reasons summarized below, we conclude that the evidence does not establish Mr. Biden's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. You still share that, still hold that view?
I do.
Okay, and even though you objected to the use of the word exonerated, from your perspective, he's been cleared of all criminal charges in your investigation. Is that fair?
I determined that based on the evidence, criminal charges are not warranted.
Okay, and I did want to go to the issue of material distinctions that you raised in your report between President Biden and former President Trump. We've got a document up here that lays some of it out, and you've answered some questions about this already, but you know, I think it seemed to be highly relevant in your analysis that President Biden cooperated, and I wanted to walk through a couple of those points. One is that he turned in classified documents to the National Archives and to the Department of Justice upon request. Is that fair?
That was a factor that we considered, yes, Congressman.
All right, he cooperated with your investigation?
Yes.
Consented to the search of multiple locations, including his house?
Correct.
Sat for a voluntary interview?
Yes.
And that was 5 hours over 2 days?
A little over 5 hours over 2 days.
Okay. Turned over and allowed investigators to review handwritten notebooks he believed to be his personal property?
Correct.
Now, with respect to the comparison with former President Trump, and I believe this is on page 11, which is still in your executive summary. And I'll just read part of this to you. Unlike the evidence involving Mr. Biden, the allegations set forth in the indictment of Mr. Trump, if proven, would present serious aggravating facts. Most notably, after being given multiple chances to return classified documents and avoid prosecution, Mr. Trump allegedly did the opposite. According to the indictment, he not only refused to return the documents for many months, but he also obstructed justice by enlisting others to destroy evidence and then to lie about it. In contrast, Mr. Biden turned in classified documents to the National Archives and the Department of Justice, consented to the search of multiple locations, including his homes, sat for a voluntary interview, and in other ways cooperated with his investigation. That's from page 11 of your report?
I see that language on page 11.
All right, and you still stand by that language?
I do, sir.
Okay. And this is this is your report. You take full responsibility for everything that's in the document?
I do. I stand by every word in it.
All right, all right. Wanted to ask you a couple of questions. One is with respect to the surprising line of questions you got right before we broke about guardianship, which seems to me like a dramatic stretch of the anything that was remotely involved in your report. Did you raise any kind of issues about Mr. Biden needing guardianship or anything along those lines?
Nothing relating to guardianship appeared in my report.
Okay. And so I guess you made the one point about him being an elderly man with poor memory, but are you saying did you say anywhere in your report that you thought not only would he be unfit to handle his own finances, but he'd be unfit for public office?
My report did not include any opinions on those issues.
Okay, I see my time is exhausted, but thank you again for your testimony. I appreciate your efforts.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized. Yield to the chairman briefly.
I think the gentleman for yielding, I'm just pointing out Mr. Ivey raised the issue of transcripts. He has complete access to every transcript that we have done in the congressional investigation. He could show up for all the depositions, like frankly, I show up for most of those. So he has complete access to that. What we don't have is access to the transcripts of all the witnesses. We only have Mr. Biden, and we don't have access to the audio tapes of all the witnesses, which is
Will
what
the
we're
gentleman
seeking.
yield?
It's not my time. I yield back to the gentleman from Virginia.
You're speaking, but it's not your time?
It's my time.
You yield it to me.
All right.
I thank the gentleman. Special Counsel Hur, thank you for being here. Your story is an impressive one. Your achievements are impressive as well. You've been a prosecutor for many years, correct?
Yes, sir.
I was not a prosecutor for more than a couple of years, but I still remember my record in jury trials. Do you remember your record?
It'll take me a little time to reconstruct, but I think I could get there.
Is it above 500?
It is above 500, yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I'm curious because the evidence that you outlined in your report is pretty significant when it comes to evidence that after his vice presidency, and I'm reading from your report, Mr. Biden willfully retained marked classified documents about Afghanistan and unmarked classified handwritten notes in his notebooks, both of which he stored in unsecured places in his home. Further, you noted that there's evidence that he willfully retained the classified Afghanistan documents, including the Thanksgiving memo, and had a strong motive to keep such classified documents. You outline what that motive is. Can you tell me what is the motive for keeping the Thanksgiving Day memo?
One of the motives that we addressed in the report was that the issue of whether or not a troop surge should be sent to Afghanistan in 2009 was a hotly contested and debated issue within the Obama administration back in 2009, and one in which then Vice President Biden had a significant role and he felt very strongly about.
I'm going to quote from your report. President Biden believed President Obama's 2009 troop surge was a mistake on par with Vietnam and wanted the record to show that he was right about Afghanistan, that his critics were wrong, and that he had opposed President Obama's mistaken decision forcefully when it was made, that his judgment was sound when it mattered most. Does that sound correct?
That language sounds familiar from the report, yes.
Okay. That is pretty significant in terms of a motivating factor for retaining those documents, wouldn't you say?
That would be a factor that a jury would assess in considering whether or not Mr. Biden had criminal intent.
And I also know that President Biden was working with a ghostwriter on a book, Mark Zwanecker, correct?
Correct.
And your investigation concluded when President Biden began work on his memoir, correct? At what time did your investigation conclude?
With respect to the second book published in 2017, we identified evidence that Mr. Biden began recorded conversations with Mr. Zwanitzer in 2016 before the end of Mr. Biden's vice presidency.
And it's your understanding that while Mr. Zwanecker interviewed President Biden, he read classified information from his notebooks nearly verbatim, sometimes for an hour or more at a time, correct?
Correct.
And was Mr. Zwanetter authorized to receive this classified information?
He was not.
And in fact, in their February 16th meeting, which has been alluded to earlier, isn't it true that President Biden read aloud and nearly verbatim classified information regarding the actions and views of U.S. military leaders and the CIA director relating to the foreign country and a foreign terrorist organization?
I believe that occurred, that was captured in a recording later in 2017, I believe in April of 2017, not February.
Okay. And Mr. Zwanetter became aware of your appointment as special counsel, correct?
At some point, Mr. Zwanitzer did become aware of my appointment, yes.
And upon learning of the investigation, Mr. Zwanetter deleted digital audio recordings of his conversations with Mr. Biden during the writing of the book, Promise Me, Dad.
Correct.
Investigators with your office interviewed Mr. Zwanetter about the deleted recordings, and he admitted that part of his motivation for deleting this recording was because he was aware there was an investigation, correct?
Correct.
And did this conduct raise concerns with your office?
It did. We considered it to be significant evidence that we needed to follow up on.
Significant evidence, and I would argue that you also had significant evidence surrounding the retention of these documents, the storage of these documents, and even though there was a bit of a disconnect between what a reasonable juror could conclude, the intent was there, the motive was there for the book, for exoneration, and I would argue that you had enough to move forward. My time has expired. I yield back.
Gentlelady from Vermont is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Special Counsel Hur, for being here today. I know it's been hours and hours, and I really appreciate you staying to the bitter end here. And I think it speaks to the possibility and promise afforded by this nation that you, as a child of immigrants, sit here as special counsel, and I, as a child of an immigrant, sit here as a member of Congress. There is a lot that's been said today, and part of the challenge that I have is trying to translate this for my constituents back home. And so I want to start with sort of the top line. So you were tasked with identifying whether criminal conduct occurred regarding classified documents. And after over a year of investigation, including 150 witness interviews and over 7 million documents reviewed, you wrote in the first sentences of the executive summary, quote, "We conclude that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter. We would reach the same conclusion even if Department of Justice policy did not foreclose criminal charges against a sitting president." Were those your words?
Yes.
Thank you. So let's get into it. Mr. Hur, at any time did DOJ leadership or the Attorney General attempt to influence the outcome of your investigation?
No.
Do you believe it's important that the special counsel investigations or any DOJ investigation be impartial and free of influence from political actors?
Yes.
Do you believe you were independent and thorough in your report?
Yes.
Do you think it's true that you received no pressure from Attorney General Garland in this matter?
That's correct.
Is it true that you had all of the resources that you needed enabled for you to conduct your interviews, to conduct your investigation, and to complete your report?
Yes.
Is it true that you recommended that the Attorney General decline to charge President Biden?
I submitted a report to the Attorney General explaining my decision that criminal charges were not warranted in this matter.
Right, so you said on page 1 of the report, quote, "We conclude that the evidence does not establish Mr. Biden's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt." Is it true that your report ultimately concluded that the evidence did not support a finding beyond a reasonable doubt that President Biden willfully retained classified materials?
Yes.
Is it true that President Biden cooperated with your investigation?
Yes.
Is it true that President Biden sat for an interview with you the day after the October 7th attacks in Israel in the midst of an international crisis?
He sat for interviews over 2 days, October 8th and October 9th.
Thank you. Is it true that that President Biden allowed the FBI to conduct thorough searches of his home and his beach house?
Yes.
Is it true that your report found multiple possible innocent explanations as to why the classified documents ended up where they did?
As part of our analysis, we walked through a number of different explanations that defense counsel could present at trial if this case were charged.
And as you said on page 6 of your report, quote, "In addition to this shortage of evidence, there are other innocent explanations for the documents that we cannot refute." Your report reads...
I see that language, yes.
Thank you. Your report reads, "With one exception, there is no record of the Department of Justice prosecuting a former president or vice president for mishandling classified documents from his own administration. The exception is former President Trump." Am I reading that correctly?
Yes.
Is it true, or is it correct that your report recommends no charges and that that would be the case even if he were not a sitting president?
Correct.
So what we've had today is hour after hour after hour of trying to distract us from the clear statements that come through this report. And you yourself have said multiple times today, there was no attempt to obstruct justice by the president, by the Department of Justice, by the Attorney General, that you had all the resources that you needed to conduct a fair and thorough investigation and report, and that what you concluded was, in fact, the evidence was not sufficient to bring charges against the president for mishandling documents. I thank you for being here today. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'll yield to you such time as you may consume, sir.
Oh, I appreciate the gentleman yielding. Mr. Hur, why did the White House lawyers go look in the first place? My understanding is they went to the Penn Biden Center. Why'd they go look in the first place? I mean, look for classified, mishandling of classified, look for classified documents. Why'd they do it?
What we identified through our investigation was that at a certain date, members of the president's staff went to the Penn Biden Center in order to get a better handle on what the information, what kinds of evidence and what kinds of materials were at the Penn Biden Center.
Were they specifically looking for potential documents that were classified, or was it a broader initial look?
My understanding is that it was a broader initial look, and I'm looking at Chapter 14, page 257 of my report about a visit in
Right.
March 2021 to the
Right.
Penn Biden Center.
Okay, in March.
In March of 2021.
And was this after the Justice Department began their investigation into President Trump?
I confess I don't have the date of the beginning of the investigation into President Trump at hand, Chairman.
I believe it was the same month. I mean, I believe it was after, so I was just curious of that. Now, one other thing I think is important for folks to understand is President Biden had this information everywhere. I mean, you said they initially went to the Penn Biden Center. Which location was it at? Do you remember when they initially did their look? Was it at the transition office? Was it at the temporary Penn Biden Center in Chinatown? Or was that at its current location where the Penn Biden Center currently sits here in, final location, I guess, in D.C.? You remember?
I believe the visit that I referenced in March 2021 that's described on page 257 was to the Penn Biden Center's permanent and current location.
Permanent and current. So there were three places, those three places classified information was at. Is that fair to say?
That's correct. The initial transition office, immediately after the end of the vice presidency, the Penn Biden Center's temporary office, and then the Penn Biden Center's permanent office.
Okay, so those, and then you had the University of Delaware Library, the University of Delaware Biden Center, right? So that's 5 total, and then you had multiple places in his home.
Correct.
The garage, the den, the office upstairs, and the office downstairs.
Correct.
So what is that? That's like 9 different places.
I've lost count, sir, but
Yeah,
that
exactly.
sounds right.
It's everywhere, and it was documents over a 50-year time frame. And then by comparison, because the Democrats want to keep comparing to President Trump's classified document right at his home with Secret Service protection. I don't know that they're anywhere else, were they?
I'm not aware of other locations,
Yeah,
President.
I think that's an important distinction. I would yield back to the gentleman for South Carolina. Appreciate him yielding.
Thank you, Chairman. Briefly, I know we've got 2 minutes left, but Mr. Hur, how would you define willful?
With respect to the intent of willfulness, what a jury has to conclude is that someone knew that their conduct was illegal when they engaged in that conduct.
Right, it's intentional, right? It's not by accident. It's not accidental or involuntary.
Correct.
Okay, so here's where I disagree with your portion of the report on willful, is that you have a gentleman who served 36 years in the Senate. I've only been here a year, but I understand the importance of handling classified information. He served 8 years as vice president. In 2010, it came to the attention of the vice president's staff that classified briefing books had not been returned. Even if they were returned, some of the content was missing. The same year, the executive secretary raised that nearly 30 of the classified briefing books from the first 6 months of 2010 were missing. In August of that year, then Vice President Biden failed to return top secret, sensitive compartmented information contents of a classified briefing book from a trip that he took to the Hamptons. And to date, you were unable to determine if these documents were ever recovered. Is that correct?
Correct.
So to me, this wasn't. When does willfulness when does willfulness factor in? Is it now in his diminished mental capacity, or is it then when he was serving as senator and vice president?
A jury would be assessing President Biden's mental state and his intent, or whether or not he had willfulness at the time that the conduct was committed.
Correct, and I think everyone can kind of plainly see the transgression or the difference between then candidate Biden or Vice President Biden and what is going on now. And so this is where I go to it. As the chairman talked about it in his opening comments, he had 8 million reasons to hold these documents. In fact, he disclosed some of this information to his ghostwriter. And so I think that there could have been willfulness. And I think, I've got 10 seconds left, but look, since 2016, there have been 3 candidates to run for president. All 3 have had allegations of issues surrounding the retention and holding of classified documents. But Mr. Hur, only one of them has been charged, and that's President Trump. And that's why people think and view this as a two-tiered system of justice. Thank you, sir.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from, Sheila, you have unanimous consent?
Yeah, I'll wait. Let him go ahead.
Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Buck.
Thank you.
Mr. Hur, they say they save the best for last, so I'm looking forward to this opportunity. First of all, what I've observed in this hearing is that one side thinks you're trying to get President Trump elected, and the other side thinks you're trying to get President Biden elected. I served as a prosecutor for 25 years. I know that you're going to take grief from both sides. You must be doing a great job in your report and during your investigation if you have convinced both sides that you are somewhere in the middle. I commend you for your background. I would have loved to have met Chief Justice Rehnquist. What a hero to conservatives and really Americans, and that must have been a great opportunity for you. But when both sides attack you, my admonition is welcome to Congress. How many, I do have a question, and it goes along the lines of what Mr. Armstrong and Mr. Fry were asking you earlier. I'm really confused about willfulness and your view of willfulness. It's clear to me that at the time, Vice President Biden knew he had classified documents. He told his, after he left the vice presidency, he told his biographer, ghostwriter, those classified documents are in the basement. So he had the mental state that he had classified documents. He also knew that his basement was not a SCIF. It is not a secure area. And so at the point, if at that point in time he said, oh my gosh, I've got to call the archivist, I've got to call Secret Service somebody and get these documents taken away, perhaps he has this defense of acting as quickly as he knew about the documents. But I don't see where the willfulness is missing when he had those two. The element's pretty clear. He possessed classified documents. He held them in a non-secure area, and he did so knowingly. He knew he had classified documents in an unsecure area. Where is the willfulness missing?
Well, sir, prosecutor to prosecutor, I certainly agree with you that the evidence in the form of the audio recorded statement where the president said to his ghostwriter, I just found all the classified stuff downstairs, that is evidence that that any prosecutor would present as significant evidence in a case if this went to trial. And reasonable jurors might well infer that President Biden formed criminal intent based on that piece of evidence. But what we did in our report was to try to walk through exhaustively. You know well as a prosecutor, you need to assess with a very cold eye the strengths of your case and the weaknesses of your case, and try to anticipate arguments that defense counsel might well present at trial. And what we tried to do in our report was to walk through potential arguments that would be presented by defense lawyers at the president's trial, and to determine how, by our judgment, how jurors would receive and perceive the evidence presented, including but not limited to evidence relating to the president's memory gaps that were in various pieces of evidence that we assessed.
So how do you overcome that recording where he says, I've got classified documents? He's 30 years in the Senate or whatever it is. He obviously knows how he has to treat classified documents. I've got classified documents in the basement. What is the defense to that? That it was a made-up recording, that it wasn't his voice, that everyone was wrong? How do you defend that particular fact, as well as I did a lot of tax cases, you had to prove a pattern of conduct. And in this case, he had a lot of documents in a lot of places. How do you overcome those things?
Yes, Congressman. So we walk through a number of different evidentiary gaps that reasonable jurors might focus on, as well as a number of different defense arguments that the president's defense lawyers could present at trial. The first is a theory or an argument to the jury that the president, yes, he did say to his ghostwriter, I just found all the classified stuff downstairs, but then soon thereafter forgot about the documents. And therefore, it would be difficult to convince a jury that actually he willfully, he knew that it was illegal to keep the documents and he continued to do so. A second argument that we considered is that perhaps these documents never actually were in Virginia in his private rental home there. Perhaps the documents were there by virtue of staff or himself having those documents at the Delaware home from the time that he was still vice president all the way through the time of their being discovered. And finally, another theory that we walk through in the report is that there were 2 folders of marked classified documents relating to Afghanistan found in the box in the president's Delaware garage. One of them contained national defense information, and the other, it would be a more difficult task to persuade a jury that it did contain national defense information. So that argument would be premised on perhaps the president was referring to the one folder that didn't contain national defense information, but was not. It would be difficult for the government to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he possessed the one that did contain national defense information. So I just laid a lot on you there, but we do our best to explain that at some length in the report.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentlelady from Texas recognized.
I thank you. And there's been a lot of time being shared, Mr. Chairman. I asked your very brief indulgence.
Wait. You got a unanimous consent or you asking a question?
Your brief indulgence on unanimous consent dash question.
No. You can do a unanimous consent request, but you don't get to get another round. Someone that comes to yield you time, but I don't think they can do that because everyone on the Democrat side has taken their time.
How did you-
I-
how did-
you know what? You know that I
How did you count
appreciate
them
the
down?
gentlelady from Texas, but you
Yes.
don't get to go 2 rounds.
I'm not trying to go 2 rounds, but
You
let
got a
me,
unanimous consent request you want in the record, state so. If not, then
I am
Close
getting
today's
ready
hearing.
to do the unanimous consent request, hoping that someone would come through the door. I ask unanimous consent.
it could only be a Republican because all the Democrats have spoken.
I ask unanimous consent that we add to the record as stated from page 1 of the executive summary. We conclude that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter. We would reach the same conclusion even if the
Without
Department of
objection.
Justice policy did not foreclose
I think the committee
criminal
knows what's
charges
in the
against the sitting
report.
president.
You
I ask
got the
unanimous
report.
consent that that sentence be put in. Secondarily, I ask unanimous consent and a
Unanimous
reference.
consent to add something to the record that's already in the record. God bless you. We'll do it.
Thank you. And I add, with the emphasis of Sheila Jackson Lee, it does not have. And I particularly ask that this be added to the record that Mr. Hur stated that Biden couldn't recall when his son Beau died. I add the unanimous consent out of an article in Politico and indicate that there was no mercy given to Mr. Biden and no mercy given to him in the decision
Without
of this report.
objection, so entered. Mr. Hurt, even though there wasn't a question in there, do you want to respond to any of that?
No, Chairman.
All right. Mr. Hur, we want to thank you
Thank
for
you. I
being
yield
here
back.
today. And we wish the best to you and your family. This concludes today's hearing. We thank our witnesses for appearing before the committee today without objection. All members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witness or additional materials for the record. Without objection, the hearing is adjourned.
The all-new GoDaddy Aero helps you get your business online in minutes with the power of AI. With the perfect name, a great logo, and a beautiful website. Just start with a domain, a few clicks, and you're in business. Make now the future at godaddy.com/aero.
Only from TurboTax. Get $100 back instantly at filing when a TurboTax expert does your taxes for you. Plus, your returns have a lifetime guarantee. Must file by March 31st. Get TurboTax full service now.
The designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. We're going to actually try three things tonight. And I apologize to anyone that doesn't like math or complexity. Originally, I had promised I was going to do something more simple tonight, and let's just say it didn't work out. So the three things we're going to try doing this evening. One, I want to spend a few minutes talking about folklore. The things we get as members of Congress, and this is both for the folks on the left and the right, you know, the comments we get, things people believe, and I want to walk through a little bit of that. I want to do sort of an update status on what's happening financially. And then I'm going to broach a subject that's really uncomfortable, and that's going to be talking about sort of the future. I'm going to talk about sort of fertility rates and what that means to being able to finance Social Security and other things. And for anyone that does not like math, please just go watch something on Netflix right now. A couple weeks ago, I did a whole presentation on the work we've done on what it takes financially to save Social Security. And one of the things I'm genuinely angry about, and I've been angry about for years, is the left uses Social Security as a weapon, and our folks are terrified to talk about it because every time we talk about trying to save it, we get attacked. And then my brothers and sisters on the left will say, well, just raise the cap. And we showed the math. We had two PhD economists spend months working out the math, and raising the caps doesn't get you anywhere close to stabilizing it. And the immorality of this place being willing to double senior poverty in 9 years. You do understand, even if you raise the caps, I showed math that you were still having about a $400 billion shortfall in the first year. And if you did all the taxes, you might got that down to $250, $300 billion shortfall. Today's math says the average couple in 2034 will take a $17,400 cut. We will double senior poverty. Is that a Republican or Democrat perversity? I'll just argue it's a moral one. Why can't we actually work on the math? Yet, when I chaired the Social Security Subcommittee, every time I tried to do a room full of actuaries and those things, my brothers and sisters on the left found more joy in the politics because it's a powerful issue. And absolutely immoral what we're doing. There's this concept of a black swan. That's something that sneaks up on you and blows you up. There's this concept of a white swan. You see it coming, and you don't do anything. We have the actuary reports in front of us. I know this is a math-free zone, so one of the first things I want to walk through is a concept of, when I did the speech a couple weeks ago, it's had a couple 100,000 views on YouTube. God bless, yay. And then you read through the comments, and those of us in Congress know about half of our comments are bots. A lot of them are Russian bots, which is hysterical. But you read through some of them, they stole my Social Security money. Okay, let's do a math and sort of walk through, because this is really important to understand. The Social Security Trust Fund built up, particularly when the baby boomers, because there was a population bubble that actually built up those tax receipts, had $3-4 trillion in it. Now that's rolled over. No one stole the money. What happened was you're not going to just let the cash sit there. So the cash was actually loaned to the Treasury, and the Treasury gives a T-bill, a type of Treasury bond. Just like if you walked into your bank and said, I want a U.S. T-bill. Same thing. And twice a year, the Treasury pays interest. The problem right now, when you hear many of us get behind these microphones and talk about the Social Security Trust Fund getting emptied, is the amount of tax receipts that come in your FICA tax every month don't cover all the checks that are going out. So every month they have to take a little bit of one of their T-bills, their Treasury bills, and hand it to the Treasury and say, we need some cash. We need some cash. Give us some cash so we can make this month's Social Security payments. But every time they do that, they use up a little bit of that savings account. And that's that savings account, the trust fund, that is emptied in 2033 or 2034. The Social Security Trust Fund, just like the Transportation Trust Fund, just like the Airline Trust Fund, all the trust funds that are borrowed from, they're paid interest. I'm going to get this wrong, but I think actually last month, because Treasury pays interest twice a year to the Social Security Trust Fund. I think last month may have been 30 billion, 40 billion. The mean interest rate is right. It's right about market. So for everyone, if you say, they stole my money, it's there. The average couple, the average will get about a $70,000, $72,000 spiff. So the money they pay into Social Security over their lifetime, the average will get about $70,000, $72,000. Now understand, that's a crap rate of return. If you had been able, 20 years ago when it was being discussed, been able to take a little sliver of that money and put it in the market, you would have had a ginormous, I love that word, larger rate of return. Politics of that became toxic. There were lots of campaigns saying, you're trying to privatize. Okay, that world is gone. It's Medicare that actually has the huge problem of, for every dollar you put in, you get almost $5 back. Social Security, you get pretty much the money you put in, crappy rate of return, but you get that back. That's the first folklore I wanted to go over. Number two, you saw in the comments, why aren't there people there? If this room was full as I'm giving this presentation, we got a problem. Because when you're sitting in this room, this is for voting. This is for debating. This is not necessarily where you do your work. You do your work in your meetings and your subcommittees and your primary committees. So when you see the room empty, this is how it's supposed to be. Now, when you have someone behind them, idiot like me behind one of these mics, you're probably on 1,000 televisions. So a lot of these presentations I do, I'm as much here to talk to staff and try to educate them on what's going on in the math. So that's actually one of the things you look for. Another one, I want to say, I have this neighbor, wonderful guy, loves screwing with me. About every 6 weeks, he sends me this text message with this article that's completely fake. David, why do you get 100% of your pension? You got it on the first day. Why do you run again? None of that's true. That's all made up. And you're functionally, for, I think, 25, 30 years, the pension system we have is pretty much identical to the forest ranger. The only reason I say those things is I believe when you see those sorts of comments in posts and other things, it's an attempt to distract. It's an attempt to avoid dealing with what's really going on around us. Madam Speaker Pro Tem, House is not in order.
Can the House be in order? Will members please take their conversations outside?
And sorry, as you know, this room has a really weird echo effect. And actually the echo sort of goes away when there's lots of bodies in here. Where there's not, the sound bounces all over. So one of the points I wanted to go to tonight is what's happening. The economy is actually fairly decent right now. GDP growth is fairly decent. Yet I want to make a point because we did the math just before coming to the floor. So we're functioning, what, 5 months into the fiscal year? We have added $1,443 billion, $1,243 billion in that 5 months. My current math is right now about every 123, 25 days at the current borrowing per day, we're adding another $1 trillion. This is in a time where the economy is pretty good. That means if my average since functionally October 1st is right now we're borrowing about $7.9 billion every day. Got to understand what that ultimately means to us because it's actually been accelerating. I think on Friday we set our all-time record. I think we were up to borrowing like $95,000 a second. Almost 100% of that growth is interest, and you're going to see this over and over in the charts, interest and healthcare costs. It's Medicare. It's things that we're not allowed to talk about. They're on autopilot. And if it continues, look, my math says we're heading towards about a $2.6, $2.7 trillion borrow this year in a year where the economy is doing fairly well. But if the current math is today's math held up, you do realize you're broaching $3 trillion. Now, I'm hoping we're going to have a really good April tax receipts. But that means right now, if you take where we're at and average it from the first day of this fiscal year for the 5 months, we're right now, our math is $2.9 trillion for this year. Borrow. That is substantially higher than CBO predicted 6 weeks ago. And that's right off the Treasury's website. So let's actually walk through reality and try to understand. My personal theory is we do lots of crazy conversations around here because we're desperate to avoid telling the public or even ourselves the truth. Every single dollar you and I, as members of Congress, vote on is borrowed. Every single dollar we vote on is borrowed, and the way we're going this year, every single dollar we vote on is borrowed, plus 8, 9, maybe $1 trillion of Medicare will be borrowed, and we don't get to vote on that. That's on autopilot. So my point is trying to understand how much. Now, this number is no longer about 73%. We think it's actually approaching 75% will be on mandatory because of the growth of interest. Let me hand that to you. So we made this board a couple days ago, and then it popped, so it wasn't $93,000, it was almost $95,000 a second. But I didn't want to waste the ink and print a new one. Why do the second? Because it's understandable. I mean, let's be brutally honest. How many of us can see 12 zeros in our head? And my fear is that is one of my great sins in trying to communicate my stress about this, is I'm here saying, it's $1 trillion. No one knows what the hell $1 trillion is. It's 12 zeros. But when every second we borrow more, substantially more than the average wage of Americans, maybe that hits home. So let's actually sort of walk through what's going on, and then my sarcasm here is going to be my anger at myself, my brothers and sisters here, particularly on the left, but also on the right. We've been debating and fighting over things that don't even qualify as a day's borrowing. We bring this place to its knees. We remove a speaker. We do this and that. And then you realize the amount of dollars being fought over only equal a couple days worth of borrowing. But darn it, it got us on television. I got to raise some money on the internet. And it's that type of false profit that I will argue is our demise, because if I can get you to fixate on the shiny objects, you're never going to be willing to absorb the truth on how ugly these numbers are. So this is where we're heading towards right now for 2024. Social Security will be our #1 spend. Looks like it's baseline, though it looks like it's ticking up. We're actually seeing something interesting where a number of retirees asking for benefits is actually ticking a little faster than we expected. But $1,450 billion. So $1,450 billion, #1 spend, Social Security. Interest, both gross and potentially net, but gross interest now is our second biggest spend. And I just had to redo the math because our math right now looks like for 2024, we're going to cross $1.1 trillion of just interest. Just interest this year. And I know for many people who are forced because you're employed to sit here and listen to an idiot like me talk, you've heard this before, but it doesn't seem to sink in. Is paying $1.1 trillion, is that a Republican or Democrat? It's math. Yet we're not allowed to actually talk about it. Because the hallways in this place are full of people coming to our doors wanting more spending, and you point this out to them and they'll often say, well, take it from someone else. I want my money. Well, it's not your money, it's the taxpayers' money. Medicare, and Medicare is rising rapidly, healthcare costs. And then defense. For all of my brothers and sisters on the left who always say, cut defense, okay. Yeah, it's sort of stupid, but it's the #4 expense. It's not #1. How often would you and I go home to our constituents and say, what's the biggest spend in government? Oh, it's defense. No, defense is now #4. And at the trend line, in the next few years, healthcare will actually be #1, and interest will be #2. And Social Security, believe it or not, will be #3. Are right tied to it. It's a very tight number there. All right, so let's actually walk through the 24 spend because I want to be able to get our heads around this. Social Security, and this was a fascinating number, and we've been trying to also average in what the new appropriations bills, remember, we're just now finishing up our 2024, so we're only 5 months late, is the net interest. Because the United States does something no other industrialized country does. We play a game with how we describe our borrowing. Oh, that's borrowing from the public. This is borrowing from the trust funds. So if anyone's listening right now and you question this, go on, the OECD. Go in and Google right now, or your favorite search engine, what is the debt to GDP of the United States according to OECD? And you're going to get a number, it's like 144%, because they don't let the scam artists say, well, you borrowed it from yourself, but you still have to pay it back, and you're going to have to actually borrow money to pay it back while you're paying interest for it. It's a con. We should never allow discussions in this place and not use the terms gross borrowing, because what? Is it magic money? We don't have to pay it back? It's just money we didn't have to go float publicly traded bonds, but we still have to pay it back. And the reason I built this chart is I wanted you to see a line right here. Even the net interest, so the publicly borrowed money, the interest we're going to pay on that, is still the second biggest spend in this government. And I'll say it, and it'll probably just land on deaf ears. So, let's actually walk through something that's really uncomfortable, and it's going to tie in. So one of my fixations is, how do you stabilize borrowing?